Unlike Dr. Martin Luther King, who was advancing for civil rights, it's not a black-led movement. There is no Martin Luther King at the front marching in the streets. There's not even Al Sharpton. This is a left progressive agenda, and I'm going to share with you why this is so with facts and data, published data. And I come from my last 30 years. I've worked in healthcare industry, so I'm very data driven in our thinking and our decision making. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to share a little bit of why I'm involved in this from uh, why I'm involved in this, not only from a social justice reason, but personal reason, and give you some historical facts of the Black community and also why all of us together, including in the Black community, why we should be reinforcing these traditional American principles and views. Okay, so why me? Next slide, please. We're going to go quick. So next slide. So this slide right here is this my dad. So he spent 25 years in the Army. That's him in the middle. That's on his best days. That's him smiling. So I can tell you, I lived part of my life with my dad. I tell you, you don't get in trouble when your father's a drill sergeant. You get one chance. The next time, you're on the missing persons report. Trust me. Unfortunately, next slide. Unfortunately, when my dad returned from Vietnam, my parents divorced. So this is the late 1960s. It was me, my four other siblings, and we lived at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne. And we moved to Harlem, New York in the late 1960s where our grandparents lived. Next slide. And our world changed overnight. We literally, now, and I was in second grade at the time. And yep, no, going back one. There we go. My world changed overnight. Second grade. And I'll never forget this story. I mean, we get off the Greyhound bus, Grand Central Station. We take the city bus to Harlem, 128th Street and 8th Avenue. We're a block away from my grandparents' apartment, and we're held up in broad daylight. So the stuff that's going on right now with our crime rates, I lived it as a kid. I know exactly what's going on. I mean, these kids are traumatized growing up in this area because this is the normal day of life. We're held up in broad daylight, and I remember we had luggage in hand still, and I'm just looking around, just waiting to see if someone's going to do something because I just moved from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, right? No one did it. They looked and they just moved and they moved along. And if you look at a lot of the violent videos that you see in New York right now, I don't look at what the violent act that happened. Look at everyone else standing around watching it and doing nothing. That's what that was like. That's where our country's coming to if we don't stand up as Christians. So I can tell you, so the guy said, my mom said, please, mister, this is all the money I have. I have 5 kids. And some guy that was standing, not that far away, barely standing up. I don't know if he was on drugs. He said, lady, you better give that man all your money. That's all that he didn't care if he had 5 kids or 10 kids. That was day one in New York City. My mom, God bless her heart, she all she wanted to be was mom. I don't think I can remember having the time, maybe when she put us to bed when she wasn't wearing an apron. That she was the mom of the 50s and 60s. She never had a driver's license. She just wanted to be a mom. And I never forget, she told me, she goes, Kendall, just because you live in a place like this doesn't mean you have to live like you're from a place like this. There's a difference. And I literally fought 2 to 3 days a week just to defend myself. And I would walk up our 10 flights of stairs to our public housing project because half the time the elevator didn't work. The other time I had to walk. The walking wasn't the problem. It was navigating around the drug addicts in the stairwell. They would knock out the light bulbs and so they'd shoot up heroin. And when I opened the door to our apartment, knock on the door and it's like 5 clicks of locks. The door would open up to the apartment. It was like a ray of sunshine into a dark cave. And to walk in and it smelled like pine sol. Every time. My mom was she was a woman from Savannah, Georgia, and she believed cleanliness is close to godliness. She was just that kind of woman. So that was my experience growing up. Unfortunately, my mother could not raise all 5 of us by herself. My older brothers and sisters were getting absorbed into the street culture of Harlem. So my father, next slide, please. my father came and got me and my younger brother to live with him in Oklahoma. He was still in the Army. He was still a drill sergeant. But because he was paying alimony and child support, all he could afford was a trailer. So I started my life being called ghetto kid, trailer trash, and a lot worse in life. But here's what I focused on was more than anything is, man, what do I do to change my life? I don't want to live like this. I didn't think that somewhere back in my mind, that was as a kid, this was happening in my mind. I didn't want this for myself. I saw the burden and worry on my mother's face every night when she put us to bed. And I had, with my dad, I had all the things, as the dad of that era, all the discipline, all the harshness, all that, all the time. And then my mom, I had all the nurture. I just didn't have them together, And so when I tell people, look, how did you do this? I said, oh, look, anybody can do this. Anyone can. Where you start in life does not mean that's where you have to stay in life in this country. Okay, most of it's all right here. And all the other one is it's here. And I'll talk to that in just a minute. Next slide. So this is a portrait of my family. Unfortunately, I don't have a real picture of my family together. I don't. So I'm using this as a stick figure because that's all I have. After my parents divorced, over the course of time, in 10 to 15 years, 4 of my siblings were involved in drugs. 3 of them were incarcerated. It broke my mother's heart, actually broke her heart. I don't know. I mean, what I saw growing up as a kid in New York and like, whatever that is, I don't want it. If he's going to be, if this guy, what, I didn't even start drinking. I still don't drink beer or anything else. I didn't start drinking wine until I was like 42. But I didn't, if drugs caused people to do that, I didn't want anything to do. I didn't need a drug campaign. If these guys were, is this what you do the minute, if this is what you do, the vulnerable women and children, you rob them, I didn't want to be like them. It was very simple to me. So I didn't go that way. My mom believed in God. We didn't have a good church. She believed in God, but I think God, for whatever reason, he spared me from all that. And so I have a personal stake because the calamity of what happened to my family is what is happening to every one of these families locally. I know it. And God spared me, not just to live my comfortable life in the suburbs in Medina and be content. He didn't do that. And I have a burden in my heart to serve in what he wants me to do. Next slide. So I didn't know how to change my life, but I knew it started with an education. So I got as much as I could. I paid my way through college, paid my way. I worked 40 hours a week. I was in the Army Reserves at the same time. And because I was in the Army Reserves and ROTC in college, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant when I was 19 years old. I had men reporting into me that were my father's age. And so if you ever read the book by Malcolm Gladwell, what was that? Outliers. He said there's a concept of 10,000 hours of peak performance before you become an expert at something. And I started getting leadership training when I was 19 years old. And I made all the goofy, dumb mistakes that young leaders would make in their 30s in corporate careers that I was making at 19. And after I graduated, I went on active duty. I served for 5 years in the Army with further leadership training from the organization that's been teaching leaders for over 200 years. While I was on active duty, I got a couple of master's degrees, and then 10 years later, I went back and got an MBA from the University of Michigan. You know what? I tell you just one thing about education. I'm a lifelong learner. It just makes you younger. So I got some other things that I've gone on different campuses across the country that I didn't want to put up here. Next slide. So this is a little recap of my career here. So the top half of that is just my 5 years on active duty. I did spend some time overseas in Korea, right on the DMZ. And this is what I used to think of. One of the reasons why I ran for office, I just felt the Republican Party, man, we have all the best stories about our country, but we never hear them. When you're on the DMZ, what I saw in Korea is incredible. You know what? You have one ethnic group divided by a line of freedom. Okay. Saying that, and what I saw, when I call it Korea when I went there, I was called Korea 1.0. I was there in 1989, and this is when they first started importing Hyundai and their cars. They weren't that great. The second version, 2.0 Korea. You know what? their cars, Hyundai, Kia, ubiquitous across our nation's highways. It's no longer GE appliances in American homes. It is LG and other Korean. You know what? And now you look at their cousins in the north, they're literally starving. They're threatening their neighbors with nuclear weapons, but the only difference, one ethnic, it is the best case study on freedom ever, and no one knows about it. Incredible. I saw it firsthand. And then good, hardworking people, family-oriented people. God bless them. I think a big Christian, movement there too. So when I got out of the military, I got recruited to Johnson & Johnson on their pharmaceutical side of the division, and started out in sales management, then marketing. I got moved to the home office in New Jersey, and I'm doing a lot of what I did in the Army was strategy, big picture strategy, and execution. And my sweet spot in my career has always been where strategy and execution meet, that intersection. Because oftentimes that's where the biggest failures happen in any organization, whether it's a private organization, nonprofit, big academic center. It is, well, we had a good strategy, but those guys screwed up the execution. Well, we could execute it, but it was so complex. You know what? Right there is accountability of leaders right there at that intersection. That's what I did. And I had a phenomenal career. I just tell you just one story. I was at the home office, Johnson & Johnson, was 37 years old. 30 years previously, I was 7 years old, being held up less than an hour away from the corporate headquarters where I was. Okay, I was 30. I'm managing a $95 million budget that I have responsibility for $1 billion brand that we launched from 0 to billion, be the number one hospital antibiotic in the country. And I was a part of that team. Only in America. Only in America. And I say this not to pat myself on the back about my career. I say that, and this is another reason I got involved, because the people that helped me in my life look like you. They look like me. They were male and female, rich and poor. Americans help each other when they see someone trying to better their lot in life. And this narrative about systemic racism and white people, like, that's wrong. I would have been negligent of my responsibility for all those people that helped me if I just let that stand. I wasn't going to. That's again another reason why I tried. All right, next slide. And Medtronic is how I got here. I just phenomenal. I just think about some iconic companies in this country. I've just been very, very fortunate, very blessed. And so anyway, for me, it was all about how I'm going to separate myself from poverty. I didn't want to be involved in church. The churches that I had been involved with have been a lot of. If you're familiar with Jeremiah Wright, the guy who was the pastor at this big church in Chicago that President Obama used to go to, and there's one of the guys that got elected to senator down in Atlanta. It is not consistent with the scriptures that as we know it. There's a lot of those little mini kind of leaders like that across in the Black community, and unfortunately we're starting to see someone beyond that. So someone invited me to church. I didn't want to go. I was living in Dallas with my first job. I didn't want to go. The only reason I went was it was a family friend. I just got, I'm going to do it to be polite. I'm going to be in and out of there, lickety split. So I'd never heard of Tony Evans before. He's the first Black pastor to get a doctorate from Dallas Theological Seminary. I didn't know who he was, but I went in there in that church, got baptized in the Christian faith, and I never left. It changed my life. Literally changed my life. The primary reason I'm still married today after 35 years, 5 children. It literally, I never heard the Bible taught that way, not preached, but taught that way before. It's very different. And along the way, we got promotion. So I tell this quick story. Tony Evans, this was right during the Rodney King riot. So we're doing another racial issue. He said, we can solve all these problems of racial just by living through the Bible. Galatians, in the book of Galatians, you're neither slave nor free, neither Greek nor Jew, male or female. We're all one on the cross. We just got to live it. Got to live it. And he said, and the next thing you got to do is stop calling yourself a white Christian, a Black Christian. You don't put your identity of your faith, the creator of the universe and his son, in the secondary position of your identity. You put that first. That's right. Everyone said amen, right? And it was comfortable. It was comfortable saying that when the church was predominantly Black. But when I got a promotion and we moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, I couldn't find a good Bible teaching church in the Black community. And I wasn't going back. So we went to this church, other side of town. I looked through the window of the church and we're like, holy smoke. We're the only tall people in here. But you know what? We went in anyway. And this is the scenario that you got to understand the Black community. We were told, family and friends, don't go to that church. They're going to treat you badly. They don't care about you. They're going to ignore you. And not only that, you're leaving your community. You're selling out. I said, look, at the end of the day, I'll sell out to anybody where, as long as Jesus Christ is being taught and the Bible's being taught, that's paramount. And Tony Evans, he said this, look, we have more people wanting to be comfortable with their culture than they're comfortable with Christ. We got to get people to understand that the faith is a contrast to culture. It's not part of the culture. Okay. And so later in life, in my corporate career, we moved 9 times, 9 different houses we bought in 25, 27 years. Moving to San Antonio, someone said, you ought to go to see this guy named Max Lucado. We were new Christian. I didn't know who he was. Prolific author. I got a huge story to tell you later about our experience there. This was phenomenal people. Then Joe Stoll was president of Moody Bible College when we lived in Chicago. Great pastor. So we've had some great discipleship. I'm putting these names up here, not the name drop, but just to tell you the exposure that we've got along our journey in life has gone, man. We're so grateful, but the key part of that is, and God equips you with that. He expects you to do something with it. Next slide, please. And I tell people it's a long journey to get here. Now, I tell people, look, if a ghetto kid in trailer trash can start this way and end up in this journey, and we have our kids now starting their lives and their adult lives, very fortunate. We're very blessed. We adopted one of those 5. I tell people I can't remember which one because I love them all the same. We've been blessed. And I tell people, look, if I can do this, look, I'm no one exceptional. I live in an exceptional country. I serve an exceptional God. I have an average IQ on my best days. So I want to encourage people that anyway, you can do this in your life. Don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to those people. Next slide, please. So I'm giving you the historical context now. We're going to start to go fast. I wanted to give you that backdrop about me personally so you understand why I'm so passionate about this. The Black family, the Black culture used to be focused on faith, family, and a pursuit for a good education for their children. Okay? Slaves used to be punished for learning to read. And during the worst part of our country's difficult time, from the economic depression of the 20s and 30s through Jim Crow South, the Black family unit was 80% 2-parent family. So you would think, well, okay, next slide. If they made it through that, what happened? Next slide. And it all happened all at the same time, this intersection of the civil rights movement, the death of Martin Luther King, the last of the civil rights movement, and the new people that we had coming in our communities. Okay, we knew, well, what's a community activist? What's the community organizer and a political activist? Well, who gets paid for that? Okay, at that time, in 1968, 76% of the Black family were 2-parent. Next slide. Now, here's important. I'm going to read this. This is important to understand about the culture of the Black community. This is one of the reasons why the left doesn't want to teach true U.S. history. So Booker T. Washington was a monumental icon. He literally, through the starting of Tuskegee University or Institute at the time, he educated nearly half, if not more, of former Black slaves to get them literate, from illiterate to literate, understanding the Bible and all that. So this is what he said, and this is the early 1910s. He said, there's another class of colored people, that's what we called back then, who make a business of keeping the troubles, the wrongs, the hardships of the Negro race before the public. Having learned that they are able to make a living out of their troubles, they have grown into a settled habit of advertising their wrongs, partly because they want sympathy and partly because it pays. Some of these people do not want the Negro to lose his grievances because they do not want to lose their jobs. If you haven't read it, I would suggest you read his autobiography, Up From Slavery. It should be required reading in every middle school and high school in this country. What he says here hasn't changed in 100 years, just different faces. And sadly, a lot of, even in the black community, they know his name, but they don't know what he stood for. They don't know his readings and his writings. And he's an icon in the black community. I should have brought, I meant to show my little show and tell coin. So much, so in 1946, there was a commemorative coin, a half dollar of Booker T. Washington that was stamped. Before diversity, before social justice, before affirmative action in 1946, because of the monumental achievement that he had in this country. Okay, next slide. Here is the start of disparity. For the first time in American history, in the 60s, beginning in the early 60s, the government paid women have children out of wedlock and keep paying them as long as they remain unmarried. Now, when you say something like that, that sounds amoral. That program is called Aid to Families with Dependent Children. They promoted it in the black community. You can, in the bottom left corner of this slide, you can see the percentage of caseloads that were pushed in the community. You can see between 1960 and 1970, the significant percentage of caseloads of those new of these new programs, the enrollment of people. That's not America, but that impacted us. That was an artificial insertion into a culture that didn't have that pattern. So next slide. So many of you guys might know Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Before he was a U.S. Senator from New York, he worked for the LBJ administration. And he wrote a report. If you Google his name, it'll still come up. His report's like 70 pages. He's a PhD in social work from Boston University, I believe. He wrote a report, Crisis of the Negro Family. And basically what he said is that there's 24% of the black community that are unwed kids. This population, if this grows, this population will not benefit from the promise of America. They will not experience the American dream. They'll be left out. It'll be a crisis. That's why he called it a crisis. He was told to be quiet, sit down, you're racist. And he never brought it up again. He later became the United States Senator from New York. But this, you can see from this slide, this was published U.S. Census Bureau. This slide was the catalyst to change. And let's go next slide. And that's the beginning of the disparity. This next slide tells you what happened to marriages. Okay, again, this is U.S. Census data. You can see the significant decline in the black community. Here, you guys can't see it because of the pictures there, but that's fine. Can I do that? Here? Well, let me do this. Because here we go. All right, here we go. So you can see from this slide a significant drop off in marriages. The saddest thing, and this is how we're going to win and gain momentum in the black community. You know what? God has made us to want and desire companionship. Need it. God did not intend for women to raise children alone and live their life alone. It's absolutely sad. Every wedding season in the black community, you don't see, rarely do you see black brides. And I have two daughters. I pray for them. I've been praying for them when they were little girls, that God has men for them, godly men for them. But this is catastrophic. This is the sad part of what happened to these social programs. And the critical race theory is no different. For you guys that are in sciences, that you're in health, if not just healthcare, but you're in science and you're in university, from a theory, at least you have a feasibility study. And in the private sector, we would have a pilot. We have these concepts that we believe that if we do these things, it would change for the better. Okay, show us your pilot, show us your metrics or your outcomes. Critical race, there are none. They're taking their ideas and it's a mass indoctrination across the. You don't do that. You don't. No other sector of our culture do you do that. Of our country, it just drives me nuts. Next slide, please. And so, what this caused, this artificial insertion, basically financially incentivizing these type of behaviors, what is called to be number one in every category. We're going to go fast here. And so next slide. The CDC publishes a report every year on the health of Americans, the health, and they do it by demographic. No other demographic, this is for black men on this slide from the CDC, no other demographic has in a pediatric population, homicide is the number one cause of death. Number three is suicide. And so, and this is what kills me about politics is they want to say, well, we have gun violence. No, we don't have gun. We have fatherless homes. Next slide. This is a busy slide. I'll just take your attention to the far right column. Just diabetes. From all the demographics, we're number one in rates of diabetes. Next slide. Number one in obesity of all demographics. And this is another I think a CDC slide as well. Next slide. Sexually transmitted diseases, we're only 12% of the population, but number one in all cases of gonorrhea and chlamydia. I'll have copies of these in a PDF for you guys afterwards. Next slide. Again, although we're number one, although we're not only 12% of the population, we're number one in cases, new cases of HIV, and that's heterosexual and same-sex relationships. Next slide. From a political standpoint, I've been watching this for 27 years. So I've been in healthcare, and every time I look at this, they look at it in isolated silos. Well, we need more education on safe sex. Well, we need more education making sure we don't use dirty needles. Well, we need more education on that. They're not looking at the holistic part. And number one reason, again, if you believe in God, you believe in good, you got to believe in the opposite of it. Because the nuclear family is the vaccine for what 90% of these issues that we're facing in the Black community, but they never bring it up. I'm going to talk about that next. Okay, keep going. Education was a component. This is the saddest part for me. And next slide, please. And I have to do something here. Minneapolis Public Schools. Now, this is something I didn't know. I knew Minnesota as having the greatest quality of life metrics I've ever seen. I mean, I lived across the country. I'm so fascinated by the diverse economy of this state. You don't see anything like it. You got from healthcare to agribusiness to financial service. It's incredible. You don't find that kind of diverse. And the quality of life metrics is just incredible. This one factor, Minneapolis Public Schools, the graduation rates for Black and Hispanic kids is at the bottom of the country. Black kids in Mississippi graduate high school at a higher rate than Black kids in Minneapolis Public Schools for 5-6 years in a row, and they don't want to open up school choice to these moms. Isn't it, you know what? That is an abomination. It is an absolute abomination. And here's what's happening. This issue that happened, the shooting that just happened with Dante Wright. I'm going to be getting some other Black men with me, and we're going to make a video to our sons and daughters that are not our sons and daughters. We're speaking to you just like you were our sons and daughters. If you get confronted by the police, don't escalate. Comply with what they're saying for you to do. If you have an issue, you feel like you're being wrong, we'll adjudicate that on the back end. But for now, follow their instructions. 99.9% of the time, you'll walk away with your life. And if there's any wrongdoing in this country, you have a right to sue. And I'll help you do it. But in the meantime, the reason why we need to have that conversation, because 90% of these kids don't have anyone telling them that. And yes, ma'am.
I just sent an email to my representative and said, could you get billboards up there that says, don't run from the police?
Well, you know, the question was, and the comment was, he sent a message to her representative saying, we need billboards that say comply with the police. Don't run from them. Basically was to comply with their instructions. But here's a scenario, guys. Before we take questions, let me go through this because this is important. What I saw as a candidate on the left is what I'm sharing with you, these slides, if anything, they're 3 to 4 to 5 years old. Some of them are 10 years old. They know this information. They know this information. They want that to happen because it gives them, it goes back to that slide I showed from Booker T. Washington. There's political and financial gain for them to keep going at it. Just like they're using the black community, just like the suicide bombers by the Palestinians of those kids. They're doing it for on purpose. Next slide. And I know that sounds inflammatory because but I'm going to explain why I tell you that's truthful. Okay. Oh, like, yeah, we lost the slide sharing. So okay, while you work on that, let me just explain on that comment. So in our lifetime, ladies and gentlemen, online and here in the room, we've gone from 80% two-parent families to 80% fatherless homes without a whisper of how to reverse it. I'm getting ready to show you data that reveals what's the benefit of marriage. I mean, this has been, I'm laying out, I want to lay this all out so you have the context and the data. Oftentimes we have the data, but we don't have the context. You're going to have both. There's not been one program. Look, I'm not a politician. I've raised my family in the private sector, and it's shocking to me. We have over 200 different nonprofits in Minneapolis. Not one is focused on reconstituting marriage as a standard in relationships in the black community. Not one. So when they say, well, how can you know they're not? Because they know the solution. They don't want it. They don't want the nuclear family. And I checked, I had a student, in fact, he's an MBA student here at the U. He lives in Boston. I said, did you check Boston and New York and see if they have, he goes, no, I couldn't find one. This is deliberate. And so listen, guys, you got to understand, if you know world history, this is not new. In the Middle Ages, they did the same thing when if you're an elite class, you'll do anything to put your thumb to stay in power at the expense of those that are powerless. Okay. All right. If we can go back a couple of slides and yeah, here we go. Okay. Next slide. Yep. We're good. Next slide. So here's the thing. We have, and this is another reason that you talk about like white privilege and I can't keep up with all the labels. But look at Hope Academy, Ascension Christian Ray, all of those faith-based schools started by the generosity and grace of predominantly white people wanting to help in their communities. How dare they say white privilege and white? It's just, it is so. Like the same institutions, the same Ivy League institutions that created critical race theory, created the aid to the family of dependent children. That didn't just come out of, it came from those institutions, said this is what the black community needs. You know, they didn't have the courage to say, you know what, this is wrong. After the first, second, and third decade of seeing the collateral damage, they blamed it on suburban white conservatives and Christians. It's absolutely just evil. These kids in these same communities that live out here are graduating high school at 90% rate of these faith-based schools. They're performing at above national average. So it's not competency, it's not skin color, it's family structure. Next slide. And if anything, I want to warn everyone, and I share this slide with everybody. This is something that's spreading beyond the black community. For the first time in American history, 50% of all births, the women under 30 are unwed. So when you think about, man, look at the social behavior. Look at what we're seeing in our culture. Well, guess what? We never had this kind of family structure before. We all across the country. If anything I share with people is, look, we're the canary in the coal mine. The only reason why it looks like it's a black racial disparity issue is because we had a 50-year head start. They're coming for your family next, coming for your neighborhoods next. Everything that they're talking about and using black disparity numbers is a front. It's a fraud to get to your families to disrupt it and make you feel guilty and be quiet. Next slide. Here's the numbers to prove it. Okay, you can see again. Remember that same slide. This is again U.S. Census Bureau. This slide is about 10 years old, and so it's always creeping up. So nothing has reversed and went down yet. 36% in the white community, 50% higher in the Hispanic community. Next slide. Okay, try to go to the next one. I'm being hacked. We just get okay. All right, here you go. How do we change it? So you're like, oh my gosh, this is so abysmal. How do we change it? Next slide. There's always hope. Okay, with us it's impossible. With God, all things. Okay? So whether we believe that or not, this is the point where we believe. This is where your confidence and my confidence comes from. Next slide. What we're doing is returning the culture. I've been involved. I am busier now than I have been even on the campaign trail. I'm spending half my time here in the Twin Cities in the inner city, half my time in the suburbs doing training like this for critical race theory, and the other one is doing this in the Black community, and it's so neat. Next slide. They say, well, how are we going to do this? Who's going to lead the charge? Next slide. It's the greatest force known to mankind, moms. Moms are catalysts for change. Mothers in the Black community have they have the moral authority like no one else. And in our entire country, Black women have the moral authority in the culture. Because who's going to deny a mom, poor Black mother, from wanting to get their families back together to the basic roots of faith, family, and desire for an education? That's all we're doing. This is not a political movement. This is a cultural, faith-focused, God-centered movement. Just like our country is a God-centered country when it was founded, and we've been living off the residual, afterburners of our grandparents and great-grandparents, and we didn't have to do anything for it. Guess what? Now that it's slowing down, it's time for us to start stand up to put the afterburners for the next generation. We've been living off of their afterburners. Next slide. So here's what we're doing. So moms are going to be the boots on the ground. So I'm going to use my military analogy. Okay. So mom's going to be the boots on the ground, and I'm using media as my air support. So if you haven't seen any of our videos, go to our website. We got the coolest videos. One promoting marriage with the men, and the other one, the group of ladies that are in that video. All of them, I never knew who they were 3 months ago. Basically, hey, we got to talk. And it's a new movement happening in America. It's really neat. And so it's going to be PragerU, library, like, the PragerU video kind of series. So it's going to be like that. We're taking a page from his book. Next slide. And so by the end of the year, I hope to have 100 women from the Black community recruited. So I'm planning on recruiting 10 cohorts of moms. Now, each cohort will have 4 to 6 women in the cohort. Their jobs is to communicate to students, to their peer groups, a lot of the stuff that we're doing, small and big, about the return to faith, family, and education. We didn't used to live like this. And they're going to share some of these same slides. This is what happened to us in the 60s. You know what? A lot of kids, a lot of college students don't even know. I asked a 2-parent juniors, young Black men, what was the percentage of 2-parent families, do you think, when I was a kid? I don't know, 20, 30%? Nope, 80. They didn't know what to say afterwards. They don't know this stuff. When I was on a campaign trail, when I talked to a lot of, in the suburbs, a lot of white people, they didn't know it either. And these people were from Harvard and Princeton and Yale. They didn't know this. So anyway, what we're going to do, we're going to educate them on faith, family, education, and their jobs is to recruit 3 other women to join them on their crusade. And so organically, locally, what we plan on having is 100 women by the end of the year. What's neat about this, I got 2 already. We've only been up and running 3.5 months. I don't even have my 501c3 yet. And 2 cohorts of women, there are 11 of them. And I got my first cohort of married men. I wasn't expecting to get that 6 months later. Okay, 5 guys, you can't wait. We're going to put a full-page ad in the Star Tribune on Father's Day. It's going to be the coolest thing. It's going to be like a Marine ad. We're looking for a few good men. It's going to be cool. This is what I'm talking about, Republican. Man, this is how you go on the offense, right? And it's going to be fun. All right, next slide. So now let's talk about marriage. We've talked about what happened to the family. Let's talk about the data around marriage. Next slide. The Justice Department does a report every year. And what they found is, where is the safest relationship for women? Marriage. Okay. How do they know that? 911 calls, domestic abuse. Where do the cops go? They go to cohabitation, like he's shacking up. I know it's cohabitation now. Cohabitation, They go to, the ex-boyfriend, that all of that stuff. The safest environment for women and children is in marriage. I always, always think about this. You hear God just going, well, you need 50 years of data if you just listen to me in the first place, right? You just my rules, not my rules, the plans I have for you are there to protect you, not to make you restrictive. And you can't do things, naughty, 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 is to protect you. You're like, oh, okay, now I get it. After the 50 years of collateral damage, it's sad. Next slide. This is a neat slide. So, what they found, they did a survey and they found for married men, they go and get their health checked more often than single guys, cohabitating guys. I said, you know what? That's not married men doing that. That's their wives. Like, did you get your prostate checked? I'm like, oh, look, don't ask me that again. So they don't, this is the data without the context. Next slide. But here, this is important. These next two slides, ladies and gentlemen, it will debunk critical race theory. And if anything, it asks, why aren't our elected leaders not doing something about this? But we are. Next slide. So oftentimes we're told about the income disparities between ethnic groups. Look at the income disparity between black and white. They never share the shaded slide. There's a direct correlation between unwed births, basically fatherless homes, and income by demographics. Oftentimes we only get we only get the blue bars, right? There's a deliberate reason why they do that. The biggest enemy to the left and the progressives, and I say this boldly, and I don't care if I'm being recorded, I'll say this. They don't want God, and they don't want the nuclear family. This is why you never see the full picture. Okay, next slide. This one slide alone should be a policy every county, state, and federal agency to promote marriage. And when you move all variables, marriage reduces poverty by 80-90% across all demographics. Across all demographics. So what this says here from the left is white families, black families in the middle, Hispanic families on the far right. And it's what single head of household, basically unwed moms or single mother homes is red, married down here. And it has a combination. It may not necessarily got two people working. That could be that part of it. But the other part of it is that when you have that type of stability, one of these spouses can actually typically earn more than they normally could by themselves, right? So again, this is published data. This is 10-year-old data. I challenge any elected official. Why isn't this being promoted? We're going to do it. We're going to do it. If you, like I said, if you go to our website, you'll see our first 1-minute video. It's pretty cool. We're going to do it. So don't tell me about racial disparity. It's two-parent privilege, not white privilege. And we need to start standing up and with the data around this. Well, you don't know. Well, the reason why there's not two-parent privilege is because of systemic racism and slavery. No, that's not because of slavery. Gee whiz, during the worst part of this country, we were 80% two-parent family before we got help from the government in the 60s. That started it. So I want you guys to be informed with the facts and be confident. And just because the other person is the black person goes, well, you don't know my experience. Well, look, I know. Have you ever adopted? Have you ever helped in the black community? Of course you have. If you have every right to say something because we're fellow Americans, and if you love them and you're based on your faith, you have the right to say something just because the color of skin. Don't adopt their methods of definitions. I don't accept their definition. Who are they to say that Martin Luther King's dream of content of character over color of skin is now usurped? I'm not accepting that, nor should you. Next slide. So I'm sorry, I don't want to get on my soapbox. So here's the other thing. The key part for us is marriage is going to be the long-term plan. We have to start working on that and mindset and everything else. But education immediately for these kids is the pathway to success, right? Next slide. So that's one of the things we're focusing on with the parents here locally. is that they should have a right. If their schools, the public schools, are not teaching their kids, years and years of failure, and I've heard this stick. Well, they need more money. Well, guess what? It's $25,000 per student in Minneapolis public schools. The faith-based schools are using half that money and better performance. It doesn't matter if they get $25,000 or $50,000. You're going to see there's not going to be a direct correlation of improvement. It's a hack. It's a political hack, and these moms shouldn't have to wait. It's not, you're not going to go from 50% graduation rate into like 90% and the kids going to Harvard in 1 year, 2 to 3 years. That's not going to happen in that. But guess what? By the time if they get it corrected, their kids are going to be in and out of school. And in the meantime, they're going to be illiterate, literally illiterate. Next slide. So this is how we get women to be interested. This is one statement. God did not intend for you to raise kids alone. And regardless of their beliefs, their political background, whatever, the head's not up and down. We start there. Next slide. My friends, this is something we put out when we had a prayer, when we launched this initiative on Easter, the Saturday between Easter Sunday and Good Friday. And it's in God we trust, not politicians. And you think about this scripture here from the book of Jeremiah. This is what the God says: "Cursed is the man who trusts in mankind and makes flesh his strength, and whose heart turns away from the Lord, for he will be like a bush in the desert and will not see when prosperity comes. But we will live in a stony waste and in the wilderness, a land of salt that is not inhabited. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose trust is the Lord." This is the difference path that we need to make our folks take. This is what happened. We trusted in people. And I was there. I'm going to tell you, we were told if you can just elect a black mayor, you'll see our fortunes will change. Just elect a black congressman, senator. We did all of that. Even a president. Nothing changed in the black community. It got worse. Every year, as a kid, I used to go from Oklahoma to New York to visit my mother in the summers. Nothing. Her situation, my siblings, my nieces and nephews, I can't forget how horrific this is. But one thing I saw was Charlie Rangel, the congressional representative from Harlem, was there for 47 years. He got wealthy, as well as his family and the cronies of his friends. And Harlem is literally a desolate of human bodies, slave across. You can say that for every major city in this country. When my siblings got arrested, including my younger brother, it broke my mother's heart. It broke her heart. She called me. She said, "Kendall, I can't do this anymore. Can I come and live with you?" And I'm sharing this with you. I don't share this a lot. I couldn't because I was being deployed to Korea. So I wrote her a note and I sent her some money. The next day I found out she ended her life. We weren't meant to live like this. This is why I'm involved. Next slide. God tells us when we walk away, because throughout the Old and New Scripture, New Testament, because people walked away from him and they trusted in the people of the land. But he's also told us, if we repent, return to him, he will embrace us. He will embrace us and restore our people and restore our land. That's our mission, and take charge. Okay, next slide. So the women that are involved with us, they're helping to change lives. We have women that are former welfare moms, to attorneys, to a young couple that they both come from single family homes. They're the first one, it's still today, they're in their 30s, only ones in their community married. They have a young child. They've been married for 8 years. They have a little 2-year-old. Just adorable. We're going to change lives. We have men involved in us that used to sell dope, used to sell drugs. He had a baby mama. He found the Lord, found God. He married his baby mom. Now she's married his wife. and they got three other kids together. Now they have five kids together. You know what? It's going to be a transformation. I'm just so honored and I'm so blessed to be a part of this. Next slide. Next one. This is what we can be known for in the country. This is what the progressive and I think those that are evil, this is what they want to be known. So they can always use this as a martyr, but this is what we're going to do. Next slide. We're going to make Minneapolis the place that resurrected the American Black family. And we're going to export it across the country. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much, Kendall. This has been wonderful. And thank you for being willing to open up that very vulnerable part of your life. Some of us have had parents who've killed themselves later in life. And so we know how awful and painful that is. So thank you for being willing to talk. We know why you're motivated in so many ways. How much time do we have here? Could you tell us, Lowell, what's the... So we have another 20 minutes. Okay. So what I think we'll do here... Okay, at the very latest. Okay. So what I suggest we do here is we take questions. I know you'll be glad to answer questions, Kendall. And so I encourage you just to raise your hand and we'll take your question here. Let me, as you're thinking about your question, let me just tell you something that Kendall alluded to just briefly, so the ambiguity in your mind is clear. I didn't mention to you, he was actually running for Congress in this last election. He was a Republican candidate in the 3rd district, which is the district that Dean Phillips won. And so that's where you spent a lot of time on the trail. That's where you talked these kinds of issues up. And so that's the context for this. Okay, so questions that any of you have? Yes, Philip, and then we'll have Kathleen.
And repeat the question.
I will repeat it. Yeah.
Okay. Really appreciate hearing from you today. Helps clarify a few things in my mind that I was thinking about. But I realize that the most effective lie is one that's immersed in truth. And how do we, first we have to identify what is the truth that those people who are hurting us, what is the truth that they have in which they can insert the lie? And you get the point.
Yeah, I do.
And I just don't know what to do with all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll repeat that. Yeah. So essentially, Phillips raised the question, inside of every truth inside of every lie, there is some kind of a truth. Is that the point you made, or did you have it reversed?
Yeah, well, I think you could say it either way.
Okay, so buried inside of any...
Then the truth is big, and the lie is insidious.
Right. So the question is, how does where is the lie here that's in the midst of the truth that's being communicated, and how do we separate that when we're talking about critical race theory? And I think
Let me speak here.
Yeah.
So they can hear you. Yeah, so this is, you're absolutely right. This is exactly what they do. So what they'll do, just like that slide I showed, they'll show you the disparities. Oh my gosh, look at the disparity. Look at the redlining that was here that we had in the 50s. And this is why you see such huge disparities. And this is why it's systemic. But no, it's not. It is the two-parent Black children that are in two-parent families, regardless of the parents' education level, their kids are not expelled at the same rate as single family kids. They graduate high school at the same general population, same random distribution curve as the general population. Those kids had low incidences of law engagement with the criminal justice system. All of this is documented, all of this is published. Okay. What they take the truth, the disparity, and make it about race when the disparity is about two-parent privilege. Okay. The problem is that number of two parents in the Black community is so small that the percentage it's masked by the big number of single parent families in the Black community. You got to be comfortable pushing back on it. No, it is a two-parent, and we're not going to, because the data shows it. and you're not telling the complete story. Now here's how I get at it. Here's how you get at it. What since the 1960s, not the 40s, not the 20s or 30s, since the 1960s, it literally starting like in the early 70s, we went from 80% two-parent families to 80% fatherless homes. Why hasn't that been reversed? Why has there been no campaign to reverse it? You know, I wish we were, an endangered species list, because there would be a program to resurrect the American black family, just because there was a program to resurrect the American black grizzly bear. That's how you get back at them on this. Okay. No program to reconstitute marriage. That's evil. And they're doing it on purpose. Sorry.
Okay, Kathleen, your question.
Okay, I have two.
Two of them.
And I forget the first one, but what, as a white woman, what can I do about this?
So Kathleen's question is simply, as a white woman, what can I do about this issue?
So, great question. I've had several of these sessions, and that question comes up. I said, first of all, don't go on the defensive, right? So what I've developed, and I'll make this available, Bob, when we're done, is a script. It's just, when they say this, you say that. It's literally, I go like, well, I need to make a script for you. Because here's the number one thing is, look, I believed, just like the entire country, we have almost a social contract with Martin Luther King when he died, that content of character over color of skin was going to be what we all believed in and embraced. And we did. And then you ask, are you trying to tell me that Martin Luther King is wrong? And just stop, don't say another word, let them answer it. Let that hang in the air. And then if they say something like, well, that back then that might also, so are you saying that that's now outdated? And if they say something, well, yes, well, then who are you to change a national social contract and drive an agenda that no one else has endorsed other than you and people that think like you? They have no right, and don't give it to them.
Yes. Okay, so. Okay, so okay, do you want to read that, or do you want me to repeat it here? Okay, so you're going to repeat it, or do you want me to?
No, he's going to be in that.
Okay, it's right there. Go ahead. Is that you, Tim? I think you're the one. Not Tim. Not Tim.
Okay, he's not ready.
Okay, so let's follow up with another question from Kathleen here.
And, go ahead, take him.
Okay, so why not? Your question.
Just now, I think Council Franklin talked about the police, stopping kids. I think you mentioned that. I want to say that about myself. I've been in this country for maybe more than 10 years as an international student, as an immigrant. I did stop by police several times. So the rules is just cooperate with them and read them, and do not remove my hand and those kind of things.
Yes.
I have a new chat with me, whatever. So I think that's one thing that a lot of kids are not being told in this country. So I never have any problems, against with police. So second thing, I think just now Pastor Kathleen mentioned about what can a white woman do. I think in Malaysia, coming from a country where we have different minorities, the churches is very small, population, Hindu, Christian. So we have this problem about how do the Hindu church, the Chinese, show to the Muslim community that we are united. I think we must cultivate a lot of practical love one another. It's not just on 3 times a year we have a rally with all the Christian black. I think this is my concern. For American church. I do not want to sound that I'm correcting you guys, but I think that there's a lot of talk about racial reconciliation before I start doing. I mean, I did my homework. I make intentional plan to do things with a black American Christian, a white American Christian, an Asian Christian, because start doing that more and more.
So Wyhan was just commenting. So it would be better if they just came up to the mic. We'd save more time. Okay, so let me just follow up so that people here online, Wyhan was just saying that he himself has learned that when it comes to interactions with the police, cooperate with them, just as Kendall was recommending. And you were also saying, let's be much more intentional about pursuing relationships across ethnic boundaries as believers in Jesus Christ. So thank you. Now let's hear from Tim Bentley online.
Okay, I got a question for Kendall. Basically, can you summarize maybe 60-second definition of critical race theory? I don't want to presume that my definition is right and what I'm hearing here and there. I want to know what the issue is and how it's defined, so we know what we're up against.
Yeah, I'll send a document again, Bob, that how they have definitions for each meaning. But basically, what they're saying is that deeply rooted in the systems of America, from how our neighborhoods are structured, from schooling and how we teach, is rooted in racism. Even when you don't even think you're being racist, you're a racist. And so there's no way that Black Americans can get ahead. So we have to have these programs that forces it. So you got to have a number of people on your board. You got to have a certain number of students, because you can't help yourself. I'm using, basically paraphrasing their definitions, but that's basically what it is. It is that you don't even see it because you're so racist that it's just like you're a fish in the water. That's the narrative. But I have the actual definitions from these elite institutions. Again, these are the same elite institutions that brought us aid to family with dependent children at the time, and never said, oops, we're sorry.
Good. Okay, now it's good. Good? Okay. Thank you. Kendall, thank you so much for your talk. I would like to try to take the side of somebody that advocates critical race theory who might argue against me. Okay. And one person might argue that many Blacks moved from the South in the 40s, especially, and they got into the projects, and that caused the families to break down. And we need to have programs to help these families. In other words, the cause of maybe wasn't the loss of God, okay? The cause was the structure of working in the factories. They weren't on the farm. That 80% were people that had grown up more rural, perhaps in the South. It was a huge movement. Yes. Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, and that's where it all built up. The family broke down. So help us understand a little more how that person might think the family broke down and how they were wrong.
Okay. Well, just leave it. I mean, this is just great, a professor, because I deleted that slide before. I said, man, my talk is kind of too long. And I had this great. It was called the Great Migration. Yeah. 4 million Black Americans left the South, and they went to the major factory towns, Minneapolis being one of them, and not just for financial gain, but you know what? This was during the Jim Crow South. They didn't want to be treated like second-class citizens. Many of them had gone off to World War II. They were treated equally. They came back home and they treated like dirt. My parents and grandparents were amongst them. I was actually born in Harlem, New York. My father's from South Carolina, and my mother's from Georgia, Savannah, Georgia. And so, yes, Chris, you're absolutely right. But here's a scenario, okay? Let's just say good intentions initially. Where's the program to course correct? No one's perfect. I give people the benefit of the doubt initially. But this country is not set up, and nor does God wants us to live in perpetual poverty. We're paying people to live in each generation. So to give you an example, and so I totally agree, Chris. again, let's just say these initial programs were meant with complete honesty, a complete way to help people get out of poverty. But after the first, second, and third, and fourth decade, when there's been no type of course correction, and here's, let me just tell you. So again, I part of my life, how God has supported my life, is I got a chance to go back and see the different worlds as a kid. And this is one of the reasons I decided to become a Republican when I was 18 years old. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, was Ford. 18, well, Republican. No one was a Republican. None. No one. It was in school and college and in our families. But here's why. Because we only had one TV. And before we can watch whatever we want to watch on TV, my father had to watch ABC News with Peter Jennings. And this was when Ronald Reagan was president. I was 17 years old. And Jesse Jackson and Charlie Rangel were on TV because Ronald Reagan had just cut spending like 5 or 10% across the board, all federal spending, including welfare. And I saw Charlie Rangel and Jesse Jack. They were in Harlem. They said, there's starving kids in Harlem. I was like, there's no starving kids in Harlem. You know what? The only starving kids in Harlem are the ones where their moms are taking the food stamps and using them for drugs. That's true. I was there. And those kids that were hungry, the other moms in the community were taking those kids to live with them until they can get someplace to live. And they were being fed. The culture takes care of itself. Okay. Even down there. And then they said something was that it was over the top for me. They said, these kids, they don't need their money cut. They need the number one thing, they need more money. So basically more, the higher welfare payment. And here's what I said, that's not the number one thing they need. They need more cops. You know why? Because at the end of the month, there was no direct deposit then. People got checks in the mail. And all of these women, and I'm a little kid, I'm looking at them when they go out at the end of the month, they never put their money in their purse because their purses are stolen every time they go out, especially at the end of the month. And they hide their cash in private parts because they know they're going to get accosted for money at the end of the month. Everyone knows when everyone gets paid. Tragic. So Chris, I agree with you with the initial structure and how that could, but again, when we look at public policy, nothing course corrected. And there's benefits. If you're getting 90% of a vote from a certain class, the number one, again, if you know world history, is those that are in power that want to stay in power. But that is not the way this country was set up. Okay, nor is that how God wants us to live.
Okay. Yes, from Barbara. Barbara, you're on.
Yes, I want to thank you very much for your presentation, and I agree with you in terms of the family being the basis of progress, and it's biblical. I do. The aspect that I have a problem with is not for people not understanding that the breakdown of the family, where that originated, was out of the historical basis of slavery, and that families were broken up. They were broken up from the beginning through that historical process. And so that is the cause, and the basis of slavery, I believe, is opportunistic, and it was financial and economic, but at the same time, it has also fallen into racist, because where it started was not with the Black family in Africa. It started with the breakup of the family through slavery. And in terms of people understanding history, I think that Caucasian or white people need to understand history. A lot of what you said is very true, but at the same time, have people read about and understood about Margaret Sanger and those kinds of things where abortion clinics are placed in Black neighborhoods? So there are a lot, this is extremely complicated. And so I just want to put that down so other people can have an opportunity. I'm very sorry for what has happened to your family and your siblings, but you are very blessed in that you are being raised up to be able to do this task that you have. But I think that I really want to understand a little bit more about your critical race theory, and would like to see something that's explaining that in more detail, because I'm not sure about some aspects of it. So I appreciate your coming and God's blessing on your ministry, because it is true that people are not speaking on that biblical principle about the nucleus family and how important it is in raising up children of character.
So Barbara, thank you for your comments. And you know what, one of the things that I think what really helps me, especially when I was on a campaign trail to be more effective, was to have my wife with me, because I know my comments can sound harsh. It does it because there's hurt behind it, but there's data behind to prove it too. But Barbara, to your point, what I want, let me give you this historical context. So first of all, slavery, I call it the second oldest profession in the world. Okay, so you know the first. So the second oldest profession in the world, slavery was universal across the world. And however, how it was practiced was different. So only 10% of the African slave trade went to North America. Like 90, the vast majority of it went to the South America. But in the British islands, like the Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and the Caribbean, Black slaves those families remained intact. They could farm on their own little areas and produce food for themselves. They came out of slavery much more of as a family unit than American Black slaves, because those families, to Barbara's point, were split up. But however that happened, there was more of a roots. And in fact, when Blacks from the Caribbean islands come here, they are much more successful in this country than Native American Blacks are. In fact, I always say the African Americans are doing great in this country. Nigerians earn 17% more than average American. Not average Black American, 17% more, because they come here, they're educated, and they have intact families. Now, with that said, Barbara, again, when through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, nearly 80%, even with that handicap of slavery, nearly 80% of the Black community had two-parent families. That's just statistical fact. I mean, the U.S. Census Bureau has been tracking this for decades. However, I believe that to her point, the roots weren't grounded as strongly as in those other, obviously because of historical slavery and how strong Black women needed to be in the communities. Here's the thing I can tell you. I say this, and I said this on the campaign trail. Do we have racist people in this country? We absolutely do. Is the country systemically racist? Absolutely not. It's a subtle nuance, but it's important. It's an important nuance. And I'll share I'll give you what I mean by that. My father grew up in the South. My father-in-law just grew up in the South. They couldn't, even if there was 100 jobs available, they couldn't apply for one of them. They weren't allowed to apply for that job. They had to go in the back of the hotel. I mean, my father-in-law grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. He said his dream job was to be a busboy or porter at the Peabody Hotel. And when I got a chance to stay there and speak there, he was like, you know what? That is the fact that you get to go there just says so much. Because I could never go in the front door. My thing was just to be a porter, like an elevator guy. And so we lose historical context of how far we've come. The country used to be systemically racist. It used to be. Unfortunately, Barbara, we have a lot of our people that have been told, and I've been told this from when I was very young, don't even try, white people don't like you, you're never going to get ahead, you're never going to, we have a lot of people still listen to that. Don't go to those kind of places because they're not going to treat you good. Don't go to that kind of company because they're going to be racist to you. When we have that negative thoughts coming into your mind, it is hard to push it out unless it's rooted from a biblical perspective. So I'll end it there. I think we're rushing on time.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. Let's give thanks. Yes. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you all for being a wonderful audience. I know we have more questions. During the 3 weeks that I'm here, the 9th, the 16th, and 23rd, we'll get into critical race theory, Barbara, and many other issues in much more depth. But let's pray together as we close. Father, we thank you now for this tremendous privilege and honor we have to have a man who's championing the restoration of the two-parent family. obedience to Christ in the area of family life in the Black community here in America. May you give him protection, provision, resilience, and may you enlarge his team for the glory and honor of Christ, we pray. Amen. Thank you so much.